right, welcome everybody to episode 53 of the Unchained Vodcast. Today we're going to talk about active crafting. Specifically, we're going to speculate about crafting and different ways that it could potentially be interesting for crafters to be more involved in the crafting process. We're going to talk about passive crafting, whether or not there's anything wrong with passive crafting, what types of active crafting we want, ideas for active crafting and active engagement in crafting, and then the degree to which we might want that. You know, where is it appropriate, where is it not appropriate, so on and so forth. So, let's get started. Andrew, you need to refresh your screen because it should not say Mass Effect anymore, and it will not change until you refresh them.
Yep.
But to get us started, one thing I did want to talk about was passive crafting. And by that, I really think there's two types of passive crafting I can think of that kind of are encapsulated by that. The first is the standard WoW model. I just say WoW model because it's, you know, it's in WoW, and WoW's popular, or has been over the ages.
Still
And
is. Yeah.
It's fairly old school crafting style where you have recipe, you take ingredients, you put them together, they make a thing. Yes, you had to press a button, but that's pretty much all you had to do. Same thing
And
for
wait.
gathering. You walk over, you click the thing, and you wait, and you watch it, and then you leave. Then there's games like EVE Online, which is even slower, which has some queuing that we seem like we're going to get with Camelot Unchained, where you have a facility, a Vox, and you go, I want to craft a thing, and then you put it in queue, and then in that game you wait potentially days for it to craft. So my first thing is there anything, I guess, is there anything wrong with that? Is there
Well, the obvious one is it's boring. First of all, second of all, I think it's in CU more specifically. They want crafters to be engaged, to have stuff to do. If you plop your Vox, start a craft, and then you have nothing left to do, I think that means they failed in their crafting design, and I don't think that's what they want.
Yeah. I do think there are things wrong with it too, going with at least the WoW model, we'll call it that. Going, and also with the fact that they see you want crafters to be engaged, the things you craft should be meaningful. The WoW model is more of a progression model of eventually you will be able to make some meaningful things for a very short period of time, but before you can make those, you have to make all of these other useless things that you will never use, never give away, never touch, to build up your skill level before you can make those other things. And I think that's where we're hoping the more active crafting and the change away from that model takes place.
Yes.
Yeah, I do think all three of us agree that having some level of activity on the crafter's part during the crafting and gathering process is desirable. I do think that there has to be some level of passivity to it in some areas, and we'll get into that a little later on, because I don't think anyone wants to get carpal tunnel playing the game and tapping keys and stuff the whole time, you know. And I can also see how some people doing crafting would also not, while they might want to do them, don't necessarily want to do active things while they're crafting all the time. Some people do enjoy the mindless redundance of just going craft the thing, craft the thing, craft the thing, craft the thing.
Yeah, some people do. I don't know how relevant. Well,
it bores the crap out of me. But
yeah, it's mind numbing. But it will be necessary to some degree with arrows, with the potions for the healers, with the stones on the because I suppose we don't know yet. We don't know yet if it if they're just gonna refine the stones so that the stone healers can engrave them, and if the crafters will only do the vials for the I forgot the name. Sorry.
I think it'll work for both of them. The Alchemist.
The Alchemist.
That's what
Thank
you're
you.
thinking of.
But yeah, that's for me the extent of the repetitiveness of crafting you can have, and eventually, if they decide to go with it, crafting food and drinks uh, later down the road.
Yeah, I
On,
think. Go ahead.
just on that token, the gathering repetitiveness is actually something I kind of like in the WoW model or other similar models. I kind of like flying around or riding around, finding all the nodes and gathering them, not for the crafting purpose, but because I usually use that as a form of sales on an auction house type system.
Yeah, and Sacrix is already kind of going into ideas. That's what I wanted to push us into next. Is the discussion of what types of active participation crafters can have when it comes to gathering.
Well, to gathering, I've talked repeatedly ad nauseum about what I would like for the gathering, which is an actual active gathering where you have like a health bar for your resource node and a stability bar for your resource node, and you need to manage those two actively as you gather. And the more aggressively you will gather, the more you will get, but then the lesser quality it's going to be. Or the lowest, or the slower you gather, the better quality you will get, but the less materials you will. And depending on how well you gather, the stability bar would go down and it can blow up in your face.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there are a few options. Like I know for me personally, I'm not a heavy crafter though, so I'll go ahead and preface it with that. But for me personally, in crafting in games, I do like the idea of there being something there, as Sacrix has mentioned, something to spice it up. Even for me, like I would be satisfied with something as simple as having a rhythmic button you have to push while you're gathering. You know,
Just thinking that like a
every
test your might type
every
thing.
exactly, but not tapping it repeatedly. Just you have to hit
Right.
it at the right time, and it's speed, and you gather faster. So there's an incentive, but it's not mandatory. Like if you want to be lazy and just gather, you can do it. It's just going to gather a little slower. But if you hit the button, you'll gather faster. Something like that's cool for me because I do think there are some areas that can be problematic. Like for instance, Fortnite. I liked Fortnite. For people that don't know, has a system where you smash into things with your pickaxe and you will gather resources from them. And as you're hitting them, it highlights weak spots, and you have to hit them, and then it moves it, and you have to hit that one, and then it moves it, and you have to hit that one, and that gives you faster mining, which is fantastic. But after playing it for like 2 weeks, I got really sick of doing it. Like I was just got to the point where I was like, I really wish I could just not do this.
Well,
I'm tired of it.
You could have a passive gathering for popcorn gathering for combatants that want to just gather basic materials. They just start their gathering and then they have to hit one button maybe or not even that, and that's fine with it. For actual high level gathering by crafters, it has to be something both, in my opinion, both engaging and challenging in some way.
I do think that's an interesting idea, having sort of different mini games depending on the level of the gathering node.
Yeah.
So, you know, as you mentioned, high level rare gathering nodes may have a more complicated mini game associated with them that's actually
Exactly.
required, whereas
Mhm.
simple resources, you know, maybe there's something that gives you a benefit, but it's not very, it's more just to keep it interesting than it is to make it
Yeah.
challenging.
And following the community nature of the game that we're trying to build, both the community itself is trying to build and the developers, situations or rare nodes or large portions of even less rare, more uncommon nodes that require multiple gatherers to work together to properly,
Yes. That too.
gather more effectively.
Yeah, I like the pocket pretty much well describes, you know, kind of the idea I was talking about with just hitting the thing at the right time to get faster mining or maybe even better results or something out of basic materials. I do agree that in some contexts, I do think it's appropriate to have obstacles to getting to the resources, to have NPC monsters
Yeah.
and things, some PvE obstruction before you get to the mining node or the gathering node or whatever it is. And of course, in the context of all this, I should add, we're talking about ways the player can engage, but of course, leveling is a component as well.
Yes.
We are assuming, I think, that in some way you level up and do things better just naturally,
Sure.
even with or without these systems.
And as Sakrik said, the equipment you have,
Mhm.
a better pickaxe, a better axe for trees, a different material for your axe or your pickaxe, depending on what you want to gather. Because maybe a basic steel pickaxe will not be able to damage the node and gather
Mhm.
from the node of high rank materials, or will just damage it and not actually gather anything.
Yeah.
And
Things like that.
we're talking about a class here. It's not a combat
Yes,
class, but it is a class, so it has components. It has abilities,
that too.
and I imagine the resource, any kind of crafting ability, probably anything outside of the Vox, will be a spell ability which has components which
Yeah.
level horizontally. So you can kind of start finding a niche within your spells. The more you use a particular type of spell,
Hmm.
maybe you're going for quality over quantity, and so you use that type of spell more often to level
Yeah.
it up.
That actually brings another idea to mind. They could potentially embrace the ability system in some way to even have some kind of challenges come up while you're gathering and doing things. Not kind. I don't want to say like you're being attacked by the node, but like there's a chance something might happen, and you need to actually activate an ability to prevent it
Yeah,
from
that's what I
from
was
exploding or
meaning with
backfiring or something.
that's what I was meaning with the stability
Mhm.
level of your node. That you maybe need to cast an ability or do something if the stability of your node goes down too fast, uh, to the risk of it blowing in your face and taking damage, if not dying from it at higher levels.
Yeah, well, it just I guess when you mentioned that before, and I was picturing like a mini game where they just have something you click on, but
Hmm.
they really could get kind of complex with it with the ability system
Mhm.
for the
Yeah.
crafter because they could have multiple different types of things that could happen, and you have to again have the correct ability slotted to interact with it. I can't really think of ways that they could do it that could be too terribly complex. Um, but that is some way they could at least try to tie it to
Um,
abilities in some
and
fashion.
as Sacrix was mentioning, more than one crafter to harvest to give more mats. Yes, but I would love for it to be like they do in forges, where you have one guy holding the hammer and two guys
Right.
hammering it in rhythm, and you have to stay in rhythm for you to get the exponential bonus of other gatherers gathering the same node with you. If you go in out of sync, then it actually becomes a detriment, something like that. So yeah, there is an actual active cooperation between crafters
Yeah.
rather than just, oh, we're two on the node, we'll double our result.
Yeah, if they treat the act of mining something, if you have a pick in hand, a pick would
Hmm.
constitute as a weapon, let's say,
Yeah.
hold in your hand. The act of picking or mining is an ability which is then governed by uh, your speed, your combat
Hmm.
speed. Basically,
Yeah.
transitions perfectly into that, where you can component into quicker combat speed, which then transitions into how delicate you're being with the mineral, how much you get back. If you have too quick of an attack, you don't get nearly as many back. But if you take the slower speed to be careful,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
and
I disagree with Sacrex about the fact that it's just gathering and there's not really any way to spice it up. If there is a challenge, it spice it up by itself. And I do think that for crafters to be a meaningful class that people want to play long term, the whole process has to be meaningful, not just the crafting, because some people will have to focus and specialize in gathering, in refining, as so far as what has been hinted at. They will have, if you want to have the best materials, refine the best way with the worthy byproducts, You will have to specialize in that. If that kind of things is not interesting, boring, not developed enough, people will not want to go there.
Yeah, I semi agree with both of you. I do think it can. I do think it can be spiced up, but I kind of agree that there is a limit to how much it can be spiced up.
Yes,
Because
I agree.
I do think, like, especially when we're talking about low level to mid tier crafting material, gathering materials and things. Um, if they add too much complexity to it, I do think, as other people have mentioned, some people like to zone out and just do that stuff. And so if there's too much complexity added to every level of gathering, I do think that can potentially be a problem. But I do think
Yeah.
there are areas it can be spiced up. For instance, I really like Grimslag's idea of some type of a divining rod type
Mhm.
thing that basically just makes complexity not in the mining itself or gathering itself, but the finding of the resources
Mhm.
to some degree. And that actually just reminded me of archaeology in WoW,
Yeah.
which I actually really kind of enjoyed doing. I actually liked flying around trying to find the little archaeology nodes, and you just
Mhm.
walked over to it and was like, bloop, got my thing. But you had to, go through all the steps of actually hunting it down. And it didn't stay fun forever, but it was actually kind of a fun little gathering thing to do for a while.
Yeah, you had. I keep referring to that game because for me, I have yet to find a game that has a more complex, well thought out, well developed gathering system, and it's Rhizome, where you had two types of skills: gathering and actual researching the nodes that you could gather, and you had a number of blocks of spell components, same as we're gonna have in CU, where you decided how you wanted to prospect. You could increase your range. You could choose a specific type of materials you wanted to prospect for. You had a lot of different types of elements like that that you needed to mash together to make your skill. So you would have different prospecting skills depending on what you wanted to do, and there were different biomes, and you had to customize also your prospecting skill depending on the biome and the type of resources you were looking for.
Speaking of crafting itself, some people have been pitching some things in crafting, and I do agree to some extent what Zachary said about needing to make the creation process interesting. So let's move into that and ideas for mini games for the actual crafting process.
Well, the first one before the crafting process, because a lot of people skip the middle part, which is going to be extremely important. It's the refining one, where it's not exactly a mini game, but they will say you will have a choice of the type of byproduct you're going to get out of your refining, the speed at which you will refine, so the end product, the quality of your end product. Um, you will have a lot of different knobs you can choose to turn to really customize your end product and the byproduct you get that will be used in different craftings also.
Does the refinement process use the Vox?
Yes,
Yes,
Okay.
it's crafting.
it is
I'm
everything.
just making sure, because if anything
Yeah,
Vox
I
use
consider
at
it to
that
be
point
crafting.
means it's not
The only
component
thing
based
that
at that point.
the only thing that doesn't use the Vox, well, it uses the manual as they called it for the Vox, which is the Libromagus.
Right.
Which this one, so they don't ask you to bring your whole Vox and plop it in the middle of a field to gather. But the Libromagus will be your uh, portable, your mobile Vox. Uh, but other than that, everything is done on the Vox. Yes.
Yeah, I do think that the refinement process. That's the one he said the most about, really, about us having different things we can adjust and tweak to affect the outcome, the product that comes out of it. So that's probably the one area we do know the most. We do know that there are going to be some kind of sort of mini game like interactions there where you have to kind of monitor it, or perhaps don't have to, but you have incentive to do some level of monitoring for it.
It sounds like the
yes.
refinement process is an attempt to transition spell building for combat classes into the crafter by allowing them to min-max the refinement process to get an end result.
Uh,
It's the same as a spell.
it's yes and no, because it's not about the spell, it's about the end product, because you will need a different, maybe if you take a block of rock to refine it into um, steel or into any type of in crystal or anything like that, you will need different type of crystals or different quality of crystals depending on what you want to craft. Because maybe a just like in real life, a sword that has some imperfection in the metal is more sturdy than one that is completely pure, because the imperfections gives it the strength um, that it needs to withstand combat.
Yeah, I do.
So it's going to be the same for the refining. It gives you the different materials you will need for your end product.
I kind of hope that the refining process isn't so much a mini game that you do during, just so that it's different. Because I think I think they'll have something like that for crafting. I almost more hope it's a matter of experimentation where you adjust the settings and hit go and see what you get. And yes, that means that
Most
once you
likely.
figure out the magical combination to what you wanted, you don't have your little mini game anymore. But by that point, you've already invested a lot of time in figuring it out, or you cheated and just got someone else to tell you.
Yeah.
There'll be guides at some point. Yes.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'll
'Cause
probably make a guide eventually.
with,
Not that I will share with anybody but the guild, but I will probably make a guide. Yeah.
I think there are a number of mini games that they could possibly do for crafting, and I have a particular idea that I'm gonna stow for to bring up in a little bit after we've discussed it a bit. But I do like Sacrix's idea, and it fits with one of the ideas that one of the or part of my idea about having something that is Guitar Hero esque, because we are talking about a musical instrument that you play. It's like an organ, a magical
yeah.
organ type thing that you play and you make stuff. So it does make sense that while they're probably, I don't think there necessarily needs to be like an epic Guitar Hero level mini game where you're like, you must match this and this and this and this and this, holy crap. But having
No,
a
it's an
toned down
RPG
version of that that you can engage in for certain things that may have some sort of effect. I think there's a lot of things they can do with that. They can have it so that it either improves your chances of a critical success, or at the very least just minimizes the chances of a critical failure. To have incentive to do things like that so that people aren't required to. Or much like we mentioned with Gathering, it could be a thing where like it's optional for most things, but if you're making the freaking an amazing epic once in a lifetime sword, you have to do it or it's just going to explode and kill everybody.
Yes. They did say that you will have two choices at the start of the crafting process, not the gathering and refining, but the crafting itself on the Vox. You will have two choices. Either you go the active route, where you will have a chance of either using less materials, getting a better result, a critical result, or higher level stuff, or you can go with what Sacrix called the drone, but the apprentice, which is the apprentice system, which would be either an NPC or a beginner crafter, a newbie crafter that can become your apprentice and get XP bonus by doing your dirty work, basically. And then you will get the minimum guaranteed quality with a chance of higher success, but you will have a very slim chance of having nothing better than your average sword, basically.
What were you saying, Brad?
Sorry.
You mentioned apprentices, and just kind of going with the theme of the community drive and working with other people. I think the apprenticeship theme works well right into that.
Yes.
I think it's convenient to have something like that really more serves to allow people to automate the process to some degree, or at least allows them to be more hands off if they want to be, but they're less likely to get an amazing product if you're hands off. One thing that I thought of that kind of goes with that, but in the opposite direction of actively engaging someone, is perhaps some sort of an inspiration system where that, and I was thinking about this because it could help to combat some of that issue that has been mentioned, where once you have a recipe, you have a recipe and you know how to make the thing and it's done. If there's some sort of a randomized inspiration system where if you're actively crafting something, and we know that some things will be queued up, so I'm assuming most engagement will just be for a short time at the beginning, and then you're done and you let it craft for however long it takes.
Yeah, no, actually, no.
Well, they've said some of these things may take days. You're not literally going to
Yes.
sit on a computer for
No,
days and press a
you,
button.
you will not sit on your thing for days, but they did say that you will not have a recipe. You put it in there and you have a guaranteed result. There will be random events happening during the crafting process, unless you have either an NPC or an apprentice looking over your Vox. It might either fail. I don't think.
Yeah,
they
I think you'll understand
actually-
if you let me
I was about
finish.
to ask that.
If you let me finish, I think you'll understand where I'm going with this. What I'm talking about is materials. That's what I'm talking about. Is materials. You put because otherwise you have materials. You put them in, and you may have to do some actions or something, but that's about it. One of the things I thought of is, what if, in order to get a better result, there's the potential chance of not only having a potential chance to get like an epic success, but if you're active crafting, there's a potential chance to get inspired to put in some other new type of ingredient or something during the crafting process.
Okay.
That would improve or change the result. And if you're not there actively doing it, or you're AFK not paying attention, you miss the chance to do it, and thus you're not going to necessarily have your critical success.
I like the idea of anything that is active during the crafting process, because as Sacred said, that people will just alt and streamline the crafting and be done with it. If that happens, in my mind, they failed.
Sure.
They basically failed because they promised that the crafting, you will not have your usual crafting bots where people can just alt a crafter, do their shit, not rely on anybody else, and just be done with it. If that happens, you can be sure that a good majority of the crafters will leave in droves, because then it's pointless to just main a crafter.
I'm okay with automation of crafting as long as it's only for a certain tier of thing. Like,
yes,
if they can't, if they can't do high-end crafting in that fashion, it's not possible. That's great. Mid-tier to low-tier, I mean, yeah, I want to make an alt that'll craft me some stuff, and if he can make me some low-tier bows that I can sell or whatever, and offhand, yeah, I'm going to flood the market a little bit, but they've already got systems in place to stop that from happening. They've mentioned the universal Vox and stuff, so you can't have numerous alts doing it, and so on and so forth. So, I do think some level of automation is a good thing, because who wants to sit there and craft 5 million newbie bows?
Oh yeah, no.
Actively,
that won't sell
that's
anything.
That's like,
Yeah,
this
no,
is just
deconstructing.
this is a waste of my
That's
effort.
not
I could be
gonna-
making
yeah.
cool weapons.
Well, they did say you won't have to do that. So, because I would hate to do that. I've done it in so many crafting systems where you have to craft that many stuff before you have even a chance of attempting a worthy items. So that's not going to be the case, and thankfully, at least
So
that's what they promised.
you both touch on two different things that kind of interact with one thing that I'm probably a little ignorant about with crafting, and that is a chance of failure. You mentioned a guaranteed result, Kriss, but then the notion of active crafting, meaning you are participating in it, and there is a chance that you do poorly in your active mini game. Does that mean that you can therefore not craft something?
I do hope that you get a
Hope so.
failure, but they did say also they don't want those critical failures where you lose everything. So I would like for you to, if you fail, you still get a portion of the materials back.
Okay.
Or a poor
Uh,
quality item or something.
or a poor quality item that you can deconstruct to at least maybe either find why it failed.
That would be interesting.
Like it gives you a hint of where you failed in your crafting process, so you don't repeat it, or get part of the materials back. Basically,
Then how is there, or should there be there, a any kind of benefit of failing towards your progression as a crafter level, or your horizontal progression as a crafter?
it might if they go with the route of getting an idea of how you failed and maybe how to improve it, depending on the failure. Um, but there should be a chance of failure. There should be an RNG. As much as everybody hates RNG in crafting,
I don't.
because most the most we've seen of RNG in crafting is Korean MMOs, where you lose everything.
Yeah.
You have a chance of failure from getting the materials, and then you have a chance of failure in combining them, and then you have a chance of failure in getting your crafting done. And then if you want to improve your crafting, you also have a chance of failure and lose everything at each step of the process. That's what everybody hates. Uh, but having a part of the crafting system being RNG is important, because it will be your only reason to actively craft and actively oversee your crafting.
So the RNG should not be tied into anything other than the active portion of crafting, if there is active portion. For
Um,
example, current WoW model is, you know what the minimum item you're crafting is. No matter
Mhm.
what, you're guaranteed that item. There's no chance of failure.
Yeah.
You have a chance for that thing to be, if it's
Better.
not already of an epic level, to become an epic level,
Mhm.
either by 1 or 2 levels, or if it is already an epic level, to then just have stat increases through Warforge,
Yeah.
Titanforge, that kind of thing. Um, you're not talking about that.
I would
Sounds
say
like.
that, well, first, I do think they should get progression even if they fail.
Yes.
Because play other classes, even if they don't kill someone, they still get progression for using their abilities. Um, but I would say it makes sense to me that the chance of, first of all, I think the problem with RNG is when it's too excessive. When the system is heavily RNG based, then I think that's a problem. There's a little bit of RNG in there, I don't think that's an issue.
Mhm.
And on that, I think the chance of failure has to be tied to the risk, or the risk of failure
Yes.
needs to be tied to
Exactly.
the chance of success. So if you're building something you've built 1,000 times, there's almost no risk of failure because you've built 1,000 of them. If you're taking a risk and trying to build something really experimental, you may build something really cool, but you're also more likely to fail.
Yeah. That's what I was actually going to talk about. That also is the if you're crafting just a basic weapon, a basic sword, you have little risk of failing that. But if you decide it should be in the crafting process, in the Vox, either at the beginning or in the middle of the crafting process, a decision of the crafter to say, I want to try to make this item epic, but I take the risk of breaking it and losing everything, or losing the materials, or part of the materials, or just losing the time I spent already starting the crafting um, process for this item. I've spent this item has been in my Vox for the last 40 hours, and I only have 3 hours left or 4 hours left, but I can take the risk of trying to go for an epic weapon and risk losing those 40 hours already, or just go with what I expect as a result. That would be what MJ talked about, which is the positive RNG, because he said he prefers giving the crafters a positive RNG rather than a negative one. But you need to have a risk of failure, especially for those epic items. If it's just basic one, you craft a newbie bow. You shouldn't be able to fail that, because that's pointless. That's a waste of time, and that's, as Sacrix keeps calling it, time gating. Yeah, it is that.
Well,
But if you want to craft Excalibur, you need to take the risk. Otherwise, it has no value because everybody's gonna have it.
I think one thing that ties into something you said earlier. Oh crap! What was it?
I've said a lot of things.
Yeah,
We've said a lot,
you were just saying something that made me think of. Oh shit! And I forgot it as soon as I started saying it.
You'll remember it.
You were literally just saying something that reminded me of something you said earlier as a some way they could tie those together. Do what?
Failure, materials.
It was
get
about.
back.
Oh yeah, I remember now.
Dang.
One way they can do that with positive RNG and failure is there is a reward in failure. Like you mentioned before, it shows them you failed. Here's why you failed. They could actually go even beyond that, and when you fail, perhaps you get additional XP in that tree because you've learned something. You can go, you failed because of this reason. You actually get plus XP because you derped. But it could be situational too, because it depends on your level or whatever. But
that
could
would
be a
good
chance.
compensation for the loss of materials and money, because you can't sell a failed product.
Yeah, you failed with your product, but you learned an important lesson. Unless, of course, you've learned it before, and then you don't get anything. But there could be some level of compensation in that fashion.
So then, without a time gate, as we've mentioned recently,
well, there will be a time gate.
Is there any reason why, given the era of people just willing to get what they want because they want it quickly, to just, I'm going to go for the epic every single time. Eventually, I'll get it because I'll get XP for failing. I'll level up, and eventually I'll get it.
You will get XP for failing. You will get XP for failing the first time. If you're attempting the same craft a second time,
you don't get any.
Yeah, if you fail it for the first time, you get a big bonus because you learned something. You fail it the second time, you're gonna get half the bonus. The third time, you're gonna get half of that half, and it goes smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, you'll still get probably normal XP for just using a thing.
Yeah.
But we have to remember they have basically confirmed that there will be a time gate on crafting things of some degree.
And
so if you craft an epic thing, it may take 3 days to do that, and then you fail.
And then you lost your materials. That costs you a lot of money.
That's what we're talking about, is the risk in the crafting, like how much risk is worth the time gate.
That will be one for them to establish partly, but most importantly, that's going to be for the crafters and the community to decide.
And they can
is the price of an epic item worth 10 failures and 2 weeks of not selling anything and only buying materials or going out to gather them,
getting ganked here and there?
Well, they can also have they can also have variability, as we mentioned. Like perhaps if you're building something, there's a chance of epic success, but if you fail, most likely you just end up with a slightly less awesome sword. But there's also a chance to critically fail, and then you end up getting like bonus XP because you learned a lesson or something, or you get materials back, but you failed to make an item, something like that. So that would vary up what the punishment is for failure, even when failure itself is not necessarily supremely common, just depends on.
They also said, and I really do hope, even as a crafter, that they hold to that, is that a critical failure could result in damage to your Vox, because your Vox is powered by crystals. If you go for an epic item that is way higher than what your Vox could safely craft, and you go with a critical failure, it could damage your Vox, and you will have to repair it, because you will have they want a money sink for the crafters, because the crafters are gonna otherwise hog all the money on the servers.
Sure.
So they want money sinks for the crafters bigger than the money sinks the combatants will have, because they will earn less money also. Maintaining your Vox is going to be one of them. Upgrading and maintaining your Vox. But as you craft, your Vox is going to get damaged and used, and you need to repair or change the crystals as they get depleted, things like that. A critical failure could result in 2 crystals shattered, and you have a week worth of sales to pay to replace those crystals. So rather than losing the materials, it could be the damage to your Vox instead.
Repairing those crystals should just cost enemy souls, which the warriors can gather from the battlefield and then
That would
sell
be.
to them.
I would be okay with that. I would be
PvP
okay with that.
And we
incentivization
close the
right there.
cycle. We gather souls to repair your Vox for money, which we then give you for your items.
Going with that, if we can really quickly, if you have to repair your Vox, should the use of should using it to craft something be a definitive, measurable damage value? If you want to make X, Y, and Z sword, or like Excalibur, which is a legendary status name, should you know how ahead of time this is going to bring my Vox down to this level?
I don't think
or worse.
No. It crafting a sword should have. You should see when on your UI, on your crafting UI, you should see how much power you want to put in that craft, rather than say crafting a sword is going to cost you that amount of power. Is how much power do I want to invest in this crafting? It will change the end result, rather than choosing the end result first and then telling you how much it's going to cost. It's more, we also always go back to that motto, and I know it's gimmicky, but for me it's also important, even for the crafting, is the choice matters. If you decide to go for a high energy spending build, you will have a better chance of crafting a better quality weapon or armor or anything. But it means you're also damaging your Vox more, or at least depleting your crystals more.
Yeah.
Going for a low energy craft will have very little chance of critical success, while going for a high energy craft will have a much higher chance. Still not 100%, but a much higher chance of going epic.
I do think one of the things, just to clarify, I mean, again, first we're just pitching ideas,
Yes,
but
exactly.
also
crafting,
but
crafting our theories.
but also the but also we're not talking about balancing right now. We're just talking about ideas and concepts, some theories that they might implement. Obviously, they have to balance it. If there is a chance of losing a craft over, like, say, 3 days of doing it, obviously the reward of succeeding has to be so amazing to make that worth even trying. Otherwise, no one will do it. So if they're not willing to put things in there that are worth that reward, then clearly the crafting time will have to be decreased or whatever to balance it out, so it's not so bad. Personally, I do think most of the time failure is probably just going to mean either a slightly substandard item, or not an item that's just standard and not epic like you were shooting for, or maybe you lose some extra materials or something. You're still going to come out with something. You're just not going to come out with the amazing thing you wanted. Yes. It might be a little bit worse than what you would have had if you just tried to make normal epic thing itself.
Yeah, even a failure should result in something.
Sure.
One of the things I did want to pitch, kind of going back to the idea of the topic of ideas for crafting minigames, is the concept I mentioned earlier that I had, which is a way to tie together solo crafting and group crafting, because they have mentioned before the possibility of having multiple crafters working at a box together.
Absolutely.
And so one of the things I thought of is, what if crafting an epic level item or a really high level item, what if crafting a high level item involved multiple little mini games? Like one person has to like you have to monitor the magical harmonies with some sort of a pretty relatively simple system, and then over here you have to manage the power output to make sure it doesn't overheat or whatever, and then you have some third system that you have to manage that is possible to do for a single person, and especially if you have an apprentice helping you. But if you're trying to make something really epic, it's going to be very hard, and only somebody that's really good at it's going to be able to manage all three things at the same time. And that's where the group crafting comes in, because then you can have one person assigned to each role, and it becomes much simpler, as well as pulling your crafter levels together.
And not just that, somebody will have to monitor the influence on the veil.
Well, that too, yeah.
Because a multi-crafter build is gonna attract
Assuming it uses magic to do it.
it.
They've said it's
They
magic.
no, they said it will. The
Yeah, they've
Vox
said it's
is
magic.
a magical item.
Okay.
The Vox is a
know.
magical item. Crafting is magic. It's been said, and unless they change how they want to do it, but
could change.
that they could change it. But right now, crafting is magic. So crafting a really high level collaborative item will have influence on the veil and a potential chance of the veil responding to that.
For that I'm gonna wait till later. But going with that scenario, that is very realistic. That's exactly what Kriss had mentioned earlier with a realistic forge. You have a guy holding the sword in place, a guy hammering, someone heating the bellows, you know that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was just thinking, they could make it so that they're really kind of, at least for high level crafting, it's the same thing. Where one person can do it themselves, but they have to actually have good player skill managing all those things at once. And it's going to be challenging versus getting buddies together to craft something, and then it becomes a much simpler process, as well as possibly having other benefits from just them all being high level crafters.
Who gets the sword?
Well,
The one who put the
whoever's
materials
Vox
in.
whoever's Vox it is. It's got to be somebody's Vox.
They're toying with the idea of having two different boxes, your personal one and a multi-user one. So I would say the one who gets the item is the one who put the materials in, and then you pay the others for their time.
/ roll 100, highest number. Typical loot rolls.
Yeah.
So
roll for item. DKP item.
I was gonna bring up the topic of how often this should be a thing. You should do the mini games and stuff, but I think we've really already kind of covered that. So I did want to ask: are there any problems with including mini games? Like, what issues might arise from them trying to include things like that in there to keep the crafting more engaged?
Well, the first one, even before players have access to that, is the time in development, because you have to come up with the ideas, you have to code them, you have to test them, you have to see how they work in usage. The second one is tediousness, as Danton has said.
It's too complex.
It can become too complex, yes, and they can, depending on what type of mini game it is, it can get old really fast. Also, as you said, in Fortnite, it got old really fast for you.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is, as it was mentioned all the way back into the gathering topic, which is sometimes people just want to press a button, have it done. They're half AFK. They just want to gather some stuff, some basic stuff, because they have to craft like 100 arrows because there's a siege coming 2 days from that, and they need to stock up on consumables, or things like that. So there needs to be a level of complexity in the minigame, or even the presence of a minigame at all, depending on what you're doing.
I would say not just complexity. There needs to be I don't know if modularness is the correct term for this. In that the thing with a challenge is it's only a challenge the first time you're doing it.
Yeah.
Once you've succeeded at it, and once you've done succeeding multiple times, it ceases to be a challenge. And that's where all the guides come out, where they tell you exactly how to do it. Becomes super simple. So if they want to keep it challenging, they either have to design it in a way where it's not predictable, or that they have to make new content continuously with new mini games, and that's development time, like you were saying.
And that's not realistic,
right?
Expectation.
The only other problem, answering the question, is the recent news, going back to something Sacrix has been talking about, and we talked about recently. They did recently confirm the group size is now at the moment 8+1, +1 being a support role class, such as the crafter. Anything that you're developing, like a mini game, depending on how quick it is, or if there are any restrictions to where you have to be to do the mini game, takes away from you fulfilling the +1 role out in the field, being a field crafter.
Yeah.
So you have to then kind of choose, do I take the time to really actively engage in my crafting, which could maybe take quite a bit of time away from me going out to be a +1 in an 8-man group, helping push things forward PvP wise.
And I do think that the level of complexity, or not necessarily just complexity, as opposed to the manner in which you deploy something, is also important. Because
Yes.
going back to the Fortnite example, the thing that got super tedious with me about hitting the little targets when you're mining was the fact that sometimes they jumped all over the place and you couldn't do it. It was actually pretty satisfying when they only moved a little bit and you could go ding, 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 and actually just move it and hit them in a sequence, and you got rewarded with this cool little musical tone that would play when you were hitting them all, and it mined a lot faster, and that was great, and you had to pay attention to it to move a little bit. But then in the middle of that, it would jump all the way across here, and you're like, and then there's like no way you can move the mouse pointer over there to it fast enough, or I mean, you really had to be like bam to get over there, and that got tedious because it would screw it up like every third time. I would just get completely screwed up after 2 or 3 hits, and then I'm like, this is just annoying now. So I think that kind of thing, the way you deploy it, how difficult you make it, is definitely important. And also amongst that, you can't forget that some of these mini games need to actually be fun to do. They're mini game, so it needs to actually be. Some of them need to be a game of some sort that you actually want to do sometimes.
And contrary to Thanatos, I would really not want bonuses from time spent crafting, because that's when multi-boxing comes in, and you have your craft results that are as efficient as a main crafter, and then it loses any purpose. So the mini games also have being crafting, gathering, refining, anything being active, requiring you to pay attention at least to some level, and not something that can be scripted easily. Also, to add it, means that actual main crafter have a value compared to a basic craft bot, where you put your alt, you park your alt. Nowadays, I almost 100% sure that most long-time WoW players have an alt parked in the forge, crafting, maybe not 24/7, but crafting pretty regularly, that they don't even pay attention to. It's like, it's there. I'll launch a few crafting sessions. I have my items done. I'm done. Um, it it must not be like that in CU. That's why the mini games are important. They need to be fun. They need to be not too tedious. They need to be, I'd say, bypassable if you invested the XP and the mastery in them, maybe to some degree, or making them faster. As you said, if you've been chopping trees for hours, for weeks on end, and you're going, you're going back there, you know what to do. You have almost zero risk. Well, there's always a risk, but you have less risk of the tree falling on your face. You know how to react. You know how to angle your axe, things like that. That's when the mini game, and that's when it becomes hard to judge how to balance that with the development time. It's the mini game getting easier as you level in that particular skill.
Yeah, I do think the other potential issue with minigames is, as people have mentioned, when you're adding more effort to these things, there also has to be more. So they have to, they have to incentivize actually going through the effort of doing these things, which also folds into development time, because if you're making more options for how something can turn out, that then folds in not just creating the mini games, but then also devising the different, well, this is a passive way to do it, this is the active way to do it. Because I do think for some things at least, maybe not all tiers of items, but for some of them, there does need to be a passive option for doing things.
For basic one, yes.
Yeah, for
And it
basic
could
and
be as
mid-tier
simple as
stuff.
just success chance. those
Mhm.
interested in doing the active version end up over, if you take the average number, having more success because they're being more active in it versus the passive is just standard
Yeah.
typical RNG behind the scenes server rolls a dice, you get the number, probably not that great.
I definitely don't think
And
they would want to. I mean, I could see how they could do something with that, Santanos, with the balancing by the number of items in there. But the one problem with that I see is leveling. If someone's trying to level up their swordsmithing and there are tons of swords in the game, they're then going to be penalized for every sword they're trying to create if it's slowing them
well,
down based on the number of swords in the game.
yeah, but no, that's the thing. You don't need to change the CD in your crafting because the economy being how it's gonna be. If you have too many swords in the game, you can craft 100 swords. They're not gonna sell, so you're on a net loss in terms of materials at first, and of time because you made them for XP. But the more items you craft exactly the same, the less XP you should get from them. You craft 100 swords, your 100th sword will give you 0 XP because you already know you can craft them with your eyes closed and half asleep.
I think that was
That's kind of what
tied
we
to
were
a
talking about
suggestion
earlier.
earlier about
Soft cap.
giving them
Also.
about giving them giving crafters a way to know what's too heavy in the market, what's flooding the market. So if they see that their sword cooldowns are really high, they'll know there's tons of swords, so I shouldn't be making swords because I should make something else that'll sell better.
I I think
But that's on the crafter. That's not on the game.
That's up to the community itself.
Yeah.
The crafter community is the market.
Mhm. I wouldn't want anything coded in the game for that. It's
I'm
for
sure
the
someone will
crafter.
make a
Yeah, it's
mod
for the
for it,
crafter
but
to do his research.
Yeah, somebody will probably make a website for it.
Yeah, also.
yeah. But talking about the crafting 100 swords, that goes back to crafting for the sake of progression, which is, I think, what they don't want to do
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
You should craft as a, I'll call it a ticket. Someone
Mhm.
wants something,
Yeah.
you're crafting that for them. You're not crafting for the sake of horizontal progression or any
Yeah.
kind of progression. You're crafting to sell money to
Mhm.
someone who wants, or to make money, get money from
From
someone
someone
who
who
wants
wants
something from you.
your item. Yeah.
There's also the possibility, they've mentioned some kind of renown rewards for crafting items
Yeah.
for the realm, not necessarily for even for
That's
players, but
Mhm.
so that could be a way of getting rid of items when there's too many of them. If there's too
Sure.
many
Yeah.
swords flooding the market, they can go, the realm wants swords, and you go turn them in for some
Right.
renown bonus or
Yep.
something,
All the
instead of gold.
NPC guards have lost their weapons.
our
We
our
need
keep
to.
guards need
Yeah.
more swords.
They're rusting. They're rusting. We need to replace them.
That's how you could fill caravans, like things
Yeah.
like that. Large quantity crafting orders.
Mhm.
Now, one of the Brand, you mentioned a question earlier. Did
I
you want
did.
to ask that?
Oh, I did. I guess I have a question to preface it. We're talking about magic in crafting in the realm of veil storms.
Mhm.
It's in the many episodes we've had, we've gone back and forth on talking about how crafting in cities is probably the safest and
Mhm.
most likely case
Yeah.
of crafting. Like, are you gonna set your Vox down in the back of a battlefield? Are you gonna go to the nearest safe zone
Yeah.
to craft? In case if crafting is magic, how do veil storms interact with major city hubs or safe city zones?
A drain on magic over the city. Maybe not, but
I'd assume the
and
safe city's safe. I mean,
yeah.
That's
But
the thing. Like,
then
is
if
there a way to
you allow in the safe city, the king could just decide multi-crafter crafting is not allowed in the safe city, in the
Good.
capital city, because the safe city is going to be the capital city. Uh, since there is a chance of veil storm, if many crafters cooperate on the crafting, they could just ban it from the city, and then that means you can't craft high yield um, crafting inside the safe city. So you have no chance of gaming the system by protecting yourself from the veil storms by crafting in the safe city. You will have to craft outside. You could be close to the safe city, so you have no risk of getting ganked while you're crafting, but not inside the safe city, so you're not safe from the consequences of your crafting.
I think I would prefer to see two things. Three things to fix that.
A lot of things.
The basis all crafting is allowed in the safe city, and crafting in the safe city is relatively safe, at least for the city itself. Let me preface that the city itself. So I would say three things to kind of balance that out. One, if you're doing some kind of crazy crafting that is too risky and it involves too much magic, instead of a Veilstorm, the Vox just explodes and kills you or your group. So you don't really have to worry about Veilstorms because the Vox explodes because you couldn't control it or whatever, and you die. And then you respawn. Two, the incentive to craft in the main city would be somewhat mitigated by the market system. The most valuable markets are probably going to be out in the battlefield areas, and so crafting in the safe city is safe, but it then means you have to transport all your stuff and your wares. You probably have to transport them out if you want to make really good money, or people have to come back, and so it's just going to take longer to sell your stuff. That's not necessarily going to de-incentivize it, but that's a choice you have to make. Do I wait longer for people to come here, or do I travel all the way back out to do it, so on and so forth? Especially when, keeps are probably going to be relatively safe, at least for the span of, a day or two or whatever. At least we hope so. It's not going to be that fast to take a castle and destroy everything inside of it. They'll have to figure that out. I had a third thing, but I totally forgot what it was now.
It's all right.
I like Grimslag's ID, especially combined with what you said, Vellic, earlier, which is having the crystals from the Vox being powered by the souls the combatant takes from the enemy. So you need to actually, an explosion of your Vox is the souls of your enemy, exacting revenge on you by overusing it.
Get credit for your kill and then get king.
Maybe why not? I wouldn't want that.
Like 3 days after they're dead, they're in the middle of a city walking around.
I got some XP.
I got some credit.
I do actually like the idea of the Vox possibly even just being powered by enemy souls, plain and simple. And so when you craft so many things, you then have to buy souls from combatants to refuel your Vox to help build the economy, so it's two-way. Because we've had that conversation before. How do people who are fighters make money? Yeah, they can popcorn gather, but not everyone wants to gather. That's boring. Some people just want to stab things.
Well, you have the different contracts also, the bounties, the protection and stuff. But selling your collected soul shards to the crafters to power their Vox to make items, to make trinkets, is a good way of for the non-crafters to get money, and a good money sink for the crafters.
Eventually. My last question I had, because I can't remember what that third thing was I was going to say, was branching out. I mean, we can talk about mini games, we can talk about whatever, but all possible things that go into crafting. What do you think is the most important part of crafting for keeping it entertaining for the crafters?
The most important, because for me it's a multi-point thing, but
I agree.
It can be not necessarily one, but what's the top tier of importance?
I'd say one of them is the risk reward chances. The more risk you take, the more reward you can get. And I'd say if I had to name one, is one word: involvement. It has to be involved. It has to be active. Crafters have to feel like they're achieving something, not just pressing buttons and playing mini games. The draw, for at least for me as a crafter, and I think for a lot of crafters, is the feeling of achieving something. For a PvPer, it's killing somebody. You achieved to survive and kill somebody who is either as good as you, or because there's not really any satisfaction of killing somebody you had an easy time killing. But if the fight is challenging or actually difficult, and you survive and kill the other, that you get a sense of achievement. crafters need the same sense of achievement, of getting that the item they get out of the box is an achievement against odds, because
Mhm.
you don't play against somebody, you play against the odds, and that's where it needs to be fulfilling and meaningful for the crafters.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because I don't usually play a crafter, but when I do crafting games, I don't care what the crafting system is as long as the reward is good enough. It can be
Yes.
really hard, but the reward I get has to be achievable and it has to be good enough to pay that price to get it.
Yeah.
Though I prefer it not be
That's
too
tough.
ridiculously hard because that's discouraging.
Yeah.
I have a couple things. The first and easiest one is more of an art style. I hope that the things that the crafters can make are visually appealing to everyone so that crafters can in tow with one of the next thing I'm going to say, can find something that people really like. Going back to WoW and transmog, for those of you who know, a lot of certain types of gear sell really well on auction house markets and WoW because they just have a huge visual appeal. I'd like the art style to be able to provide something like that where crafters can find a niche in crafting something that is extremely visually appealing as well as beneficial stat wise. Um, but more than that, I'd like them to be able, through whatever systems possible, I don't have exact examples, to be able to find the prestige and pride in building unique things that take the involvement that Kriss mentioned, not just through crafting, but through PvP or assisting PvP, I won't say, because I know there are a lot of crafters who don't want to touch PvP, and that's great too. Perfectly fine. With the whole +1 thing now, especially, you'll see a lot of them hopefully out
Yeah.
there. But having friends who PvP to protect you to go get these rare mats that you need to make this unique thing that you happen to find because your guild took control of the depths one day and you managed to find a rare, I won't call it a recipe, but something that alluded to you being able to create this thing that no one else has had that you've seen. That pride, individual pride, not just community pride or realm pride, but individual crafting pride, I think is important to crafters.
It's totally random
Yes.
thought that just gave me. Um, what do you think of the idea of players being able to discover recipes that in their end product aren't necessarily different than something that someone else discovered, but has either a different stylization to it or a different name. For instance, when you look at Diablo, you can get an item. There's some items that spawn and things, and they really do the same thing as another item, but they have a different cool name and they look a little different or something like that. And so it's a unique sort of item that you found. Someone else could potentially have the exact same thing, but most likely they're going to have one by a different name or slightly different in some way. And so I was just thinking about that because I could see how not that being as like a major system, just as being a sort of a potentially fun thing where you could be the only one that has a sword by this name, and so people know that that's your sword, even though it also has made by on it. But
Well, you can name items as a crafter.
So
You
like
will be
I
able
guess
to
that's
name items.
Kingslayer
Yeah.
type thing.
I
and-
I would like not the you can rename items. So when you craft it, you can name it. But I would like it to be not a naming, but a renaming, because and that's going to be very controversial because it heavily favors the ones who experiment and the ones who got into the game early, which is if you're the first to discover a design, a combination, the first who discovers the Damascus combination and the way to make Damascus steel can name it, and it becomes all the items with this particular combination get named after the name he chose. And then crafters get recognized. You have a record of the crafters who discovered those things and named them,
That's
and that's a
problematic because
badge of
some
honor.
people are some people are gonna name some stuff, some stupid shit.
Well, you
Yeah.
you need to have a side, an oversight of that. But yeah, I would love that to happen, where the first to discover, to craft like the first epic sword made with crystals and different things, and that has an epic result, can name it, and all the items that have this result after that
That's
get
server
named after
renowned.
it.
Like
Yeah,
player
server
community
wide.
server renowned.
Yeah,
Yeah. I could see something like that on a smaller scale, depending on how the component system, if at all, integrates with Michelle's concept work currently on the
mhm,
different visual effects for class abilities.
mhm.
If you can apply, how do we call it, air based elemental types to weapons, even if you're not a class that uses that type of thing,
Mm,
as a crafter, being able to learn the right components through huge involvement to
mhm.
apply a fire element to a sword, that for someone who wouldn't normally have that as a
Yeah,
visual or even actual air
and
afflicted
that should be a
benefit.
mastery rank skill.
Right. Those kind
So
of things. That's what I'm
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, I would be okay with that. Yeah, having the the involvement. So that's why I said it's multiple things, because the involvement is one thing. The recognition is another one. Being able to be known for having uh, the best, or the maybe the sharpest of swords, or the strongest armors, or things like that. Being known for that realm wide is what I, as a crafter, would live for if I could actually be known for that. There's not a lot of games that have a crafting system that allows that. But
Right.
if you could, um, it would be for a crafter that wants to master, really focus on his crafting and master an element of the crafting as deep as he can go, and as specialized as he can go. Being known for that is a huge drive and boost to the interest in playing a crafter, and continuing down the road.
I do wish this kind of diverges a bit to Grimslag's comment. I do wish that MJ would or could tell us what he has in mind when it comes to recipes, because he has kind of suggested that he has something in mind for making it difficult, at least making it
Yeah, to
difficult
for guides to be,
for
yeah.
guides to exist and put out recipes and stuff. And he's kind of talked about some randomization and things, but at the same time, he's admitted that he can't like just change
Yeah.
the ingredients, because that's easily once you figure out what how they're changed, then you just
Mm,
do the same thing anyway, and it's
yeah.
wasted coding time. Um, so again, that goes with all the crafting stuff we don't
That
really know. Um,
um the the
It, I,
the the age where you couldn't find guides online, and you had that sense of wonder and of discovery, is gone.
I
I,
think
I
his
would love for it to be
approach.
there, but I know it's not. And by the end of the second or third week, you're gonna have guides on everything.
Oh yeah, I think his approach is with the intent of going more of a Minecraft style, where it's just kind of there and you have to learn it as you go. Eventually, you can go back. I mean, Minecraft's been out for a long time now, many years. There's guides everywhere for it, so you know how to build things now. But initially, when you first started Minecraft, you didn't know anything. You had to experiment how to build everything. I think that's kind of the approach
but there's
he's trying
guides now.
to
Yeah.
start. There are guides now, yes. That's the approach he's starting with. At a certain point, I think uh it's just unavoidable.
I do
But at
think
at the
I
same time, if the crafting is complicated enough, it delays when the guides are gonna come, because the
yes.
more customizable you make the system, the more combination you make possible for the system, the harder it is to make a guide. If taking to make a sword, you need 100 elements. You need like 100 of metal. or stone or crystal or something, and having 20 of that, 20 of that, 60 of that gives a different result of if you have 50 and 50 of that, and then maybe 45, depending on how customizable the end result is, depending on the percentage of each element in it. It makes it harder and harder to have guides, precise guides. And since there's no best in slot in CU,
It's crafter gear.
it's going to be, yeah.
But
There's not going to be the sword that will give you plus 100 to fire spells.
especially when levels factored in as well. The actual
Yes.
progression of their skills, which may affect the quantity of resources needed, and so continually be changing the proportions of ingredients needed to make the ideal thing. But I also think they can turn positive RNG onto this as well through the discovery of recipes that way. Kind of like I mentioned with the inspiration idea. When you're crafting something, you might get a pop-up that inspires you to make it better. Well, and what if you succeed in doing that and making a better item, it might also inspire a new recipe that you pull out and go, oh, I've just got a hint to a new thing I can possibly make, or a new improvement I can make, and then it becomes more standardized, and you unlock it in your tome of crafting, whatever it's called, I don't remember. And
the Libromagus.
Yeah, the Libromagus. And so, there might be some RNG system that while you're building things, instead of just leveling and going, I can make mad things, make more things, you can experiment and make things, but then there's also some levels or some types of things that have to be kind of RNG inspired. And so there's a random element to it where you can't just force it by a guide and go, I know I have to do this to unlock this thing. There might be some RNG element to actually unlocking the new recipes and things. Again, not random to the degree where it never happens, just random to the degree to where you can't force it to happen. Unless you just, craft shit tons of it. But at any rate, I think we've about beaten this topic to death.
Yeah, I could talk a lot more about it, but
I'm sure once we know more about it.
Definitely.
I do want to thank everybody for coming out. We will have episode again in 2 weeks.
Will you be here in 2 weeks?
I will be. I'm flying back in Friday night, so I will be here Saturday. That's why I had to think about it for a minute. I was like, no, I'm missing my gaming stream, but I will be here for this. So we got another episode in 2 weeks where I believe we will be talking about guilds and their impact on post-launch as well as beta, just
pending
combat in general. As usual, pending any new information that's more exciting. But anyway.
Hopefully.
Thanks for coming out, and I will be closing off the recording. So if you're watching on YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah.